Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Emeka Obara. I'm a partner with Nextier Power. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you to the September 2017 edition of the Nextier Power Dialogue, an initiative of Nextier Power. Today, we'll spend the next few hours debating rural electrification. According to the Overseas Development Institute, 60% of Nigerians don't have access to power, which equates to 100 million Nigerians are in darkness. Given this critical statistic, it is important to review and try and find a solution for this problem. The major objective for today's event are: one, to discuss the reason why communities have been left in darkness; two, debate practical solutions to providing electricity to the unconnected; three, address investment opportunities in rural electrification. We hope at the end of the next few hours, we're all more informed on the off-grid sector and can use this knowledge to further address the current Nigerian electricity challenges. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Mr. Dabo Oyewole, who served as a special advisor to not one but two ministers, national planning and finance. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of South Africa and a master's degree from the London School of Economics. He's also a Yale Fellow and an Aspen Fellow. Currently, he works as a senior public sector advisor at McKinsey. Please give a round of applause for Dabo. Thank you.
I'd like to say good evening. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. And let me first just say how impressed, and I'm sure you would agree with me, how impressed I am with the Nextier team. Let me welcome, with a round of applause, one of our main speakers this evening, Rolake Achimugbe, who is the Head of Energy and Natural Resources at MBN Merchant Bank. It's delightful to have Rolake here. We worked together about 16 years ago. I'm not giving up too much. And also we were both at LSE at about the same time, but with a little bit of space in between. But it's really remarkable. This is a sector where you don't find too many women. And I think it's a sector that actually affects women the most. So to have someone who has spent her time mastering, and you will find out when she speaks, mastering a trade, understanding the issues and proffering solutions, I think she stands as a very good example of what we need to happen in this sector. Well, okay, really great to have you.
Thank you.
Next, delighted to welcome Jim Howlett, who is the Director of Pan-Africa Solar. Jim doing some really remarkable work, helping us to rethink how we engage in the energy discussion, but also thinking about innovative ways in how we solve some of the problems that we face in our nation. Jim, we welcome and really great to have you with us today. Looking forward to finally, we do have Dr. Sanusi Ohiare, who is the Executive Director of the Rural Electrification Agency. Just from hearing that alone, we know only too well that quite a number of the questions that we have likely to be directed towards him. But we also know that given his experience in this sector over, I think, decades, and of course his academic pedigree, he will be sharing with us some really, really great ideas about how to get things working right in the electrical power sector in Nigeria. Please welcome him to the round of applause. So before we start, let me tell you a little story. When I was asked to moderate this panel, my first instinct was to say no. I'm an international development specialist. I do public policy. I don't know much about electrical power supply. Half the time you're listening to the discussion, this grid, that grid, upgrade, downgrade. You just think to yourself, look, I just want light, right? But the request came at the time when I was actually in England, and I was sitting on the balcony doing some writing, and I felt a sense of shall I say, strangeness. You know, when you just sort of like, what's going on here? And I'm not sure how many people have had that experience of realizing that our problem with power does not only stifle our economy, but it actually steals our opportunity to have silence and be able to think clearly. And immediately I thought about that. I thought, well, many Nigerians don't understand, people like myself. So definitely, I should be one of the people here asking those critical questions, asking you to explain all those technical terms to us, and helping us to understand what the solutions are in a productive and practical way. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, hold on to your seats for what will definitely be a thought-provoking and enlightening discussion. Let me start with some opening remarks from Rolake or Akinwumi. Rolake, over to you.
Thank you, Dago. It's an honor to be here tonight. Thanks for the privilege. It's a topic I'm very passionate about, and one, of course, like many of you, which we live with every day. In fact, only a few days ago, I suddenly discovered that there might be a problem with my meter at home, because suddenly the credits on it started diminishing quite fast, and we discovered that there was a fault. And one of the things, if you know anything about the energy sector in Nigeria, we spent a lot of time doing several things around ensuring that you have supply. You're either chasing diesel, you're trying to sort out some fault, you're trying to sort out, someone stored a TV in my house and someone inadvertently switched it on without putting the surge protector. Next thing, the whole thing blew. So we spend a lot of time as a people and as an economy on energy. And it's not only reflected in our daily lives, but it's also reflected in our actual growth and development, so it's quite crucial. One of the areas I'm really passionate about is the off-grid space. You know, I think potentially it is really the leapfrog, and you know,
I'm going to jump in there because my duty to these wonderful people is to help them to understand what you mean. Off-grid. Define it very briefly, and then let's go on.
Okay, sorry, I sort of take it for granted, but perhaps not. I guess the simplest terms is it's anything that is off-grid. By the way, most of you are already off-grid, let's face it, right? You're not connected to the grid when you don't have main supply. So being on your generator is essentially off-grid. There is a standalone, decentralized power system that's supplying your home. That's the simplest way I can put it. I'm sure some of the engineers can define it in more technical terms. So you generally have three systems, typically in markets like Africa, which is grid, mostly for large-scale utility projects, mini-grids, which are now sort of growing in popularity across the continent, and off-grid. And so it's one of the spaces I'm passionate about, and particularly how you finance structures in off-grid that can meet the needs of different communities. The topic I've been giving to sort of give an overview on is before and after the grid. In Nigeria, I like to think of it as after and after the grid. And why I say that, so we know a lot of the stats. We know about the numbers in Africa who have no access to electricity and what that means in terms of the socioeconomic impact. And so when we think about community life before and after the grid, one of the things we first have to define is who these communities are. So I'm not thinking about them purely in the sense of physical locations, so rural communities, semi-urban, urban communities, but I'm also thinking of them in terms of demographics of requirements. So for instance, the industrial community has a need for off-grid electricity. The urban residential community has a need for off-grid electricity. And when you then break it down to that level, you also see that the purchasing power and the credit worthiness of each of these communities are also different. So the solutions you bring to each of these communities also need to be bespoke and take into account their needs. So just to sort of give you some broad things that I think may be interesting to note, and particularly as it concerns the before aspect of life in Nigeria, particularly. And one which I'm passionate about, so I'll just go through. Every year, millions of women have to give birth by candlelight. Nearly half of all vaccine delivered to developing countries is wasted due to unreliable electricity supplies. Nigeria as a country has 5 to 7 million tons of CO2 emissions annually, primarily as a result of hydrocarbons and other more dirty forms of energy. And most African off-grid families spend more than $140 a year on lighting. Now, to some of us, that may not seem like much, but that is essentially a fortune for those who cannot afford electricity. When we think globally, 1 in 5 have no access, and 3 in 5 in Africa have access. When you think about where the population growth in decades is going to come from, let's say to the year to 2100, the world will probably be approximately around 10 billion people. That's the predictions that's being made by UNDP and others. Africa will probably be about 3.5 billion people. That is a potential challenge, but that is an opportunity. So that already gives us an indication of the potential size of the market we're talking about. Some other things around the challenges of the off-grid space. Inadequate infrastructure, limited consumer financing. By and large, to a large extent, a lot of the equipment is still being imported, although we're starting to see some new models which are emerging, which I hope we'll explore. And then when you look at one aspect of the market, which I particularly focus on from the finance perspective, which is the urban residential market, the leading player in the solar homes market, for instance, has only around 60,000 units in the market. And I know that sounds like a broad generalization because the solar market is quite segmented. Households and SMEs in just 3 states in Nigeria spend $440 million per year on energy. This is some research that was done by OLON. And it's estimated that in Nigeria we have a 200 billion gap in energy use in the country. But here's the interesting thing. The willingness of communities in Nigeria to pay for off-grid electricity is up to 4 times that of India. And for me, what this speaks to is that Nigerians have suffered for so long that in a sense, anything will do, just give us electricity, right? So I could go on and on, but I'm not going to belabor the...
No, but just on that very important point. So were you saying that essentially, that irrespective of the economic challenges that we face, that Nigerians are more than willing to pay as much as required to have electrical power?
Well, if you think about the linkages across the economy, it is precisely a large part of the economic challenges are caused by the lack of power. And so once you think of it from that perspective, and of course the willingness to pay, it sounds like a generalization. There are other aspects to it, which also has to do with consumer awareness, which I think also affects the willingness to pay. You know, it's a purely a demand and supply thing, but it's been demonstrated in terms of what you look at what we're paying for off-grid electricity and those in the market who are currently end users of off-grid electricity. I think the results also speak for themselves. So I guess the big question for us is how do we start to penetrate this market and how do we take advantage of the opportunity in the off-grid space? The first port of call here is, I often hear lots of debates and panels where people talk about the fact that we don't need government if you're generating less than the threshold that is required, for instance, to get a license, then why need government? I think that's not really ideal, and the reason I say this is government itself provides an enabling environment. And then if you look at what the off-grid space means, both in terms of technological capacity, as well as employment, when you look at solar deployment, the training of engineers, capacity building, and the entire ecosystem and value chain about what it takes to create a credible off-grid solution. I think we can start to look at more sustainable forms of economic development, which I think most reasonable governments would be willing to dialogue about. And I'm talking particularly about the employment potential in that space. One of the things we often look at when we look at leapfrog industries is not just in the absolute existence of those technologies, but the offshoot technologies that they have the possibility to spark. Yes, you know, solar, off-grid, decentralized solar is all well and good, but how does that integrate with my home equipment? How does that integrate with my TV? How does that integrate with my fridge, my air conditioning, and all the other devices that I use to? So those are other benefits I think we can see in this space. And of course, further down in the discussion, I can talk a bit more around some of the challenges and opportunities.
I think it's all great. Excellent. Well, okay, thank you very much for those opening remarks. You've actually, I am holding on to my questions because I think you've actually touched on some of the critical issues. So let's quickly move on to Jim, who's going to talk to us in a connected fashion to a detailed approach to penetrating this off-grid market. And of course, Jim, you've been pioneering some innovative solutions. It'll be interesting to hear your thoughts and ideas, and also talk about some of the challenges you're facing.
Okay, well, it's very nice to be invited to be a panelist here. I've attended this event on a number of occasions, but it's nice to get this opportunity. I suppose we're a bit unusual because Pan-African Solar actually came to Nigeria to develop utility scale projects, and in that regard we were one of the 14 companies to sign a power purchase agreement with the government last year. But when we were thinking particularly around the community issues and talking to our lenders, they highlighted an important point, which was, so you're going to be building this large-scale utility plant, but the communities around the project aren't really going to benefit from your electricity. So can you think of a way that you can, try and help them? Maybe look at some solar home systems. So we started to look at some solar home system products that are available around the world and were being used in Africa. And we came across a system called B-Box. And so I suppose what I'm trying to say is that...
Sorry, Jim. Could you say that again, just so everybody
Can hear you very clearly.
which part?
The name.
B-Box.
B-Box.
B-Box, B-O-X.
Gotcha. Please proceed.
So they're a company based in the UK, and they already have a business based in both Kenya and Rwanda, and based out of London. So anyway, we started to talk with them, and the product that they had seemed to fit really well with what kind of conditions we could see around our project site, which was communities that were not connected, farmers who were using kerosene or using torch batteries. And so we continued our discussions with them, and then we could see that there was actually real potential to have a business here in Nigeria. So we established a company late last year, and we went and applied for some grant money from the Solar Nigeria program, and we were fortunate enough to get some grant. And so we started a pilot project about 6 months ago, just on the outskirts of Kano. And so I think it's quite interesting because we weren't looking at the market as a whole and deciding where to go. We were kind of directed already as to, you need to kind of go in. You need to kind of be looking at this kind of space. I think with the market as it is, or the off-grid space as it is in Nigeria, you have to be really clear on what it is that you're trying to sell. And the model that we decided to go with is a service-based model of paying monthly fees over a period of time in the open system. We decided we wouldn't do that. What we'd rather do is we would offer a monthly service, and as they progressed, and we really tried to focus on, well, really trying to focus on providing good customer service, so that it's a perpetual rental model, with the idea that the consumers, if they have problems with the system, they can come back to us and we can either fix it or we can switch it out. And then further down the line, for example, when the life of the battery stops, we can then help them with that. So that was kind of the business model that we settled on and that we're using in our model. In terms of the market, as already been discussed, the market is huge. I mean, it goes all the way from pico solar products all the way up to industrial sites that want to be off grid. So again, we had to be very clear on where we're trying to focus our efforts. In fact, we did have some sales aims to try and focus on this peri-urban market, and for our particular project, it didn't work at all for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. Is that they already have electrical appliances, how do they plug them in? So it kind of meets a need but doesn't completely satisfy their demand. So we're really focused on people who are off grid already. And then I suppose now we're at the end of the pilot project, and we've learned a lot in the last 6 months. But what's interesting is that we are finding farmers or finding rural customers that are willing to pay for this service is not a problem. What the issues that we're having is how do how do we meet the demand that we're finding, some of the issues around customs and duties of solar products coming into the country, based on distribution network. That's where our real issues are. Making sure that that there's a certain standards being kept. So we're pretty excited about this product, and we think we're talking to a number of investors now that are willing to come in at this early stage. And so we think that there's big potential for these kind of products in Nigeria.
Very, very interesting. I mean, a layman listening to both of you would assume that you're saying that forget the grid, off-grid is the future. But then let's hear from a man who's at the helm of affairs in not only trying to make sure things work the right way, but also in helping to make sure there's an enabling policy framework for doing this. And also, one thing we haven't talked about, and I think this may have been a strategic omission, is government. What's government's role in this? How can government really engage? And I mean, of course, you also think about the fact that, well, if you stay on grid, the presumption is that government makes money from it. If you go off grid, private companies make money. So there are some. So would we expect some form of resistance or not? Or maybe this is the solution government has been looking for. Really delighted to have Dr. O'Hare with us, and hopefully he'll be able to shine some light on those issues. And again, just share some additional thoughts. Doctor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. With your permission, please, I'd like to stand and use this. Okay, so today's topic, I'm supposed to talk about the role, government's role in accelerating access to electricity to unserved locations. I was going to start by asking what you guys think we should be doing as government. But then Rolake mentioned, and the moderator as well mentioned, that providing enabling environment. So this is a bit generic. What is enabling environment, really? So I'll just start by giving the background of where we've been and where we are. So the pre-reform era and then post-2005. So the first electricity that was generated in Nigeria, as we all know, is in 1896. That was over 120 years ago. And from there, in 1951, 1956, we had different commissions that were created. And then 1972, we had NEPA, and 2005, we had to establish some sort of reforms because NEPA was not working. Why wasn't it working? Everything was under government, under NEPA. It was vertically integrated, from generation, distribution, transmission. Government was in charge of everything. So there were various arguments for government to move away from doing everything. So at that time, the role of government was basically to fund, plan, bring about the policies, regulations, and all of those. I don't think we had a lot of regulations, more of standards, standardization and the rest. But there was need, there was the clamor for regulation, to come into the space, as well as allow private, players to come in as well. So that led to the Electricity Power Sector Reform Acts of 2005, and on that, the reforms, the privatization, commercialization, and all of that, emanated from that. So in 2013, we had the privatization of the generation and distribution assets, and NEPA was also doing rural electrification alongside, the other three. So there was the need and there was the worry for those in rural communities. How are they going to fare under a privatized, sector, where the motive, obviously, for the distribution companies would be how to maximize, profit. So government thought it wise, to have an agency called the Rural Electrification Agency that will still try to handle the aspect of providing electricity to the rural people. And these people, but there are quite a number of them. From our estimation, we have between 95 to 100 million of these people that are off the grid, that do not have access at all. We are not talking about they have electricity and sometimes it's epileptic and all of that. They don't use electricity, basically. So it's such a huge challenge, and the agency is charged with not just providing electricity. So what's our role now? The Act also envisaged that government, we are moving away, it's a paradigm shift, yeah? So we are moving away from government doing everything to government more like coordinating, as well as, providing the right policies, providing the regulations, and some funds, as well as bringing in those private people, supporting them, the developers, to see how, we can scale up providing access to electricity via different technologies. So I will just categorize the role of government into 5, broad themes, which is policies, regulation, planning, coordination, funding, and monitoring, basically. So before now, even with the Electricity Power Sector Reform Act coming into play, the REA carried on with what NEPA used to do, which was basically to extend the grid. So they want to provide electricity to the rural communities, so they felt the easiest way to do is just to extend the lines to these rural communities. And sometimes it stretches over 10, 20, 30 kilometers just to provide to some small communities. So it wasn't sustainable, it's not viable, it's not done based on any financial consideration and all of those things. And handing over to the discos, they didn't like this because for them it was a waste of their time. They didn't want the government to continue extending the lines and forcing it on them because they never really provided electricity to these areas anyways, because they didn't find it attractive. So we came on board, I think in April. We were appointed in April. The board was inaugurated in May. So now that we're on board, we're now moving away from just grid extension, because even before coming into government, we've been advocates for mini grid, solar systems, decentralized systems basically. So now we're trying to see how we can implement this. Thankfully, we had the government, before we came in 2015, that has been very committed, to doing the right things. We had some policies that had already been drafted and just waiting approval, right from the previous government. This was never gotten for some reason, I don't know. But when this government came in place, talking about policies now, we had this Nigerian Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Policy. It was immediately approved. We had this Rural Electrification Strategy and Implementation Plan, which ought to have been approved 1 year after the creation of REA. So since 2006, the Act mandated that we should have that kind of strategy and policy and implementation plan. But for some reason, it was just there. So 11 years after, this government came in and they found the need to quickly approve it. They reviewed it, they saw it was good for the country, and they approved it. We also had this mini grid regulations. We actually worked on it when I was, with the GIZ. And this government didn't waste any time to, this government didn't waste any time to also approve that mini grid regulations. So why am I mentioning these things? You need to know the direction that government wants to go to. It's one thing to talk, and it's another thing to walk the talk. So on the basis of having that rural education strategy and implementation plan in place, the REA has now developed what we call operational guidelines for rural electrification fund, because the REA has a fund where we're supposed to support private initiatives by providing some sort of grant and then leveraging on the equity from the private sector to sort of scale up mini grid deployments and solar systems. So that's for the funding aspect. And then now, monitoring projects. Government used to just, put projects on ground and just leave it there. Putting that monitoring in place is very important, and that's what we are doing now. And it's also very instructive to know that we are just like in this middle now. We are coordinating. We are talking to various stakeholders. We're also looking to have platforms like this where we come and share ideas. We want to hear from you. Encourage us in the things we are doing right, and also criticize us objectively very well. And also be part of solutions, not just talk. Let's look at how we can join. This country belongs to all of us, so it's very important for us to see how we can put heads together and move the sector forward. So I'll leave it at this, so that we'll take questions subsequently. Thank you very much.
Comfort zones in this regard. I started on the right, so allow me to start on the left with you. So you've spoken to us about what government is trying to do and doing right. Can you tell us what the government is unable to do and finding challenges in actually implementing in terms of delivering power? What are the key critical challenges within the government and then also in engaging with the rest of the private sector?
Okay, so what government is not able to do, I will not pretend to be able to do is to, fund the sector, completely. A lot of people always talk about, oh, government can do this, government can do that. We cannot do it, and we are not even pretending about it. And that's why for REF, for instance, that I mentioned earlier on, the only source of funding that we've gotten now is from government budget, and it's not even enough. I mean, we're talking about, this year they gave us 1 billion, and we're talking about 95 million people that don't have access to electricity. So we also have other sources of funding that the Act allows us to tap in, from to pull resources together. We have from the regulator, NERC, they're supposed to be giving us, after their audited accounts, they're supposed to give us, the surplus.
I like the word supposed, don't they?
They haven't given us. If they are here, please, you help us beg them to give us. And then they are also supposed to give us all the fines, when they find any of these codes or licenses that run foul of the law.
How do you monitor them? How do you monitor the revenue that comes in a manner that enables you to say, guys, pay up?
They're supposed to be audited. They're supposed to have audited accounts, and all this should be monitored by auditors. But we were discussing with them, but honestly, we are not getting very good feedback, and we might have to look for other ways to get our money.
And that's what I like, thinking out of the box, because these are urgent, pressing issues, and we need urgent, pressing solutions.
And most importantly, let me just give this point. They are supposed to determine a rate that the licensees and eligible customers will give to us. They're not even willing to have that conversation right now. And it's quite frustrating. So aside from these sources that legitimately is supposed to come to us, we're also leveraging on other, like you said, thinking outside the box. We're discussing with the World Bank, this power sector, as part of this power sector recovery plan, we're expecting at least $350 million to come from there. We're discussing with the African Development Bank to see how we can also fund and support this. We're talking with this French Development Bank, the GIZs, the TFIs, all of these stakeholders.
But
we're also encouraging private people, to come. We're discussing with them to see how we can synergize and work together. So yeah.
So it's clear that there are challenges with being able to access the resources within the government, and therefore you're looking to international development partners and the private sector.
Yes.
Some people would argue that we cannot mortgage our future and put it in the hands of external partners, especially in a country where we're sending satellites to space. So, if we say we should look internally at the resources that we have. Somebody said the other day that they landed and they've never seen so many private jets in one airport. People feel that this is a country that is wealthy and should be able to use its own resources to answer its own, to address its own challenges. So if we're thinking in-house within the country, particularly with the private sector, how do you think you might be able to harness the private sector's ability to fund, support, and to implement?
Well, that's the thinking of the Act, really. Going forward, it's supposed to be a paradigm shift from just government doing everything to seeing how we can bring in the private sector. So the model that we're looking at now is matching funds, bringing in equity from the private sector, and then also providing grants from government. So that way we have capable hands in the private sector that can actually put these projects on ground, run it sustainably, and also provide electricity on a 24-hour basis to the rural communities. So that's what we are sort of looking towards now. And even if we do not have the funds, we're also willing to encourage the private people to come, talk to us, tell us how we can help, basically reduce the development costs.
Are you dangling any carrots? Are there any key incentives? A lot of people feel, in many cases, and I'm not trying to give you a hard time, I'm just trying to give you an opportunity to answer some questions. A lot of people feel that, particularly foreign investors and even local entrepreneurs, that you go to government, you have an idea, but really there are no incentives that make it easier for them to be able to implement. Are you providing any incentives to attract the private sector?
What we can do is to have some sort of, because all these private developers, they come, we're discussing with them, and they have different needs. Some of them, they ask for things that we cannot do, and we tell them straight up, we're sorry, we can't do this. Some of them just ask for some basic things, and maybe just to facilitate, some things to make their, coming into the market easier for them. Those things we're willing to do, and then we are currently doing, and we will continue to do. So we're not going to deceive ourselves. So people come and say we should guarantee that they are going to put projects on the ground, and when we act like the bulk trader, where they, provide some sort of incentives and then guarantee supply and, that we're going to buy. We don't have the funds to do this. We are not, set up to do this. But other people come and they say, can you help us talk to this state government to give us land, and then maybe, follow that, have your staff follow us to this community to do some sort of surveys, all those little things. Okay, you want to get licensed from America, how do we go about it? Can you help with those, sort of little things? We can help to all those things. And then in the case where we have funds as well available, we also provide grants.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll get you off the hot seat for a while, let you catch your breath, and we're definitely coming back to you. And at the back of your mind, please start thinking about, as we round up later on, some of the practical suggestions that you're making to the different sectors, private sector, development partners, government agencies, about how we can actually address the stranglehold of the neck of the Nigerian economy and livelihood. But thank you very much. Your candor is much appreciated. Jim, I think it was last year, I bought my grandmother a solar empowered lamp. And she was first fascinated when I told her that all you have to do is put it in the sun, and at night you just bring it in the house. And she asked me a very plain question: why are we not doing this for the whole country? Your idea about P-Box is really interesting, really innovative, and it actually is potentially one of the solutions that is accessible and easy. But what I hear is that there's a lot of resistance to solar power in Nigeria. Some of our foreign colleagues will say one of the beautiful things about Nigeria is wherever you go, you will get enough sunlight. So if the sunlight is available, why are people not running in droves to make sure that they have solar-powered houses and solar-powered appliances? It seems like a simple solution, but obviously it's not. People are not adopting or adapting to that. Any ideas?
Yeah, it does seem like a simple solution, doesn't it? But it isn't, and that's a really good question as to why, isn't it? I suppose that historically there's been some solar projects which haven't worked. So I'm relatively new to Nigeria. I've only been here since January last year, but going around Abuja and I see lots of solar streetlights which don't work. And there's, this, I'm sure it's not just, I'm sure that's not, just unique to Abuja, that's other places. Plus, I suppose the areas that we're going, perhaps, they haven't really been exposed to solar before. So yeah, there definitely needs to be more education, and of course we come across that resistance. But what we find is, once you put a system in someone's house and they use it and they turn it on, the lights go on, and they turn it off, the lights go on, they can immediately see the value in that. So I think it's just a question really of it for some of these rural areas, exposure to it and the sensitization process. I mean, we've spent, we have our, it's pilot projects, so we have one shop, and then we've gone out to the rural areas and I've put in sub-agents, and so they can demonstrate, and that really helps. It's really a question of education exposure, I think.
So it's about hearts and minds, changing attitudes and changing perceptions.
Yeah, and Lighting Africa has done some work on this already in some of these areas, so that helps now. But more needs to be done, I think.
Okay, so since we're talking about government's role and what you're trying to do, what has your experience been in terms of just trying to get the government to support these initiatives, or even in terms of you being able to roll out some of your ideas? Please do not mind that Dr. Harry is right next to you. Speak freely. We will not hold you down. But are there any critical challenges that you have found in terms of working with governmental agencies, either at the local, state, or federal level, in getting these P-boxes rolled out and bringing power or light to the people?
I think I could probably talk at length about government agencies on the utilities solar projects, but
please do.
No, I'm not going to. That's not for now. But in terms of B-Box, we haven't really gone to government agencies that much. I mean, there's some development programs. The Solar Nigeria program is one, which is looking at how you can develop a private sector market for solar in Nigeria, and they've been very supportive. In terms of as far as I see the government role, I'm just basically repeating what's been said before, is there's a market there. We've seen that. We know it. There's people that are willing to pay. What would help us is maybe look at customs duties on products that come in. The solar panels don't have a duty, but other parts of the system do. And then around the issue of payments, so when you go to somewhere like Kenya, the mobile money market is mature. Here it's kind of infancy, and it's been difficult to work out how we can come by a payment solution that's going to be easy and can be used by these kind of rural communities. So that's a bit complicated. So I'd say those are the two main areas that critical challenges that we face at the moment, amongst others.
I'm sure. But that's very helpful. I mean, the other question I will ask you is one that I've heard a few people talk about, and this could be myth and it could be reality. People are wary of the fact that they feel that having solar powered equipment, that the challenge they will face is lack of access to maintenance. That you don't really have the equipment that is easily available. You can't just go, or you can't be driving down the road and see a sign like we do in Nigeria, electrician, plumber, organizer. You don't see solar panel expert. So people feel that yes, it may be a solution, but maintenance and skills capacity for maintenance and supply of equipment, and the assumption also is that the equipment is expensive. Can you tell us whether that's a myth or a reality?
I think that's a reality, and that's, the reason we have a model so the idea is that we offer a worry-free service for the customers. So that,
what does worry-free mean?
Well, so that they pay a monthly fee, and then if there's something goes wrong or it needs fixing, then we'll come and fix it, or we'll swap it, or, that's part of our customer service that we provide. We do the operational maintenance, we do the installation, we will, we'll send a technician to your house to fix it.
Well, for a country of 170 million people or more, that's really potentially lucrative business. But at the same time, I would say that quite a number of people may feel that the capacity for you to cover that breadth of demand may be challenging. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or are there challenges?
Our business is very capital intensive, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it is a big, it will be a, that's one of the challenges we have to face, and we have to go step by step as we expand our coverage.
And lastly, in terms of local competitors, do you have any local competitors? And to what degree are you, as you expand this, are you building internal capacity within the country itself? Although my assumption is that a business model will not lend itself to wanting people to take business away from it. But I see this as a win-win, where you are able to deliver a service, provide employment, provide skills training. To what extent is that part of your agenda? And do you have any plans as you think about rolling out a new product than where you are at the moment?
Okay, so first thing, the market's really big, right? So and it's untapped. So at the moment, you go where you want, I suppose, in a way. So one of the interesting questions is that we've yet to see is what happens when these type of products come up against each other. That we're yet to see. Will one of our customers say, okay, I'm willing to pay a premium for the customer service, or are they going to say, okay, I'm gonna migrate to a different product which I can own maybe in 18 months, 3 years, 5 years, and then I'll deal with the O&M issues later. So that's one aspect. What happens when our product comes up against the Loom, or sort of comes up against the Zuri product? Right? We don't know. Hopefully our branding and our customer service offering is good enough to deal with that. The other two questions, which were very good, I've forgotten, so you'll have to repeat them. Sorry.
Well, we can move on because of time, but I will still come back to it. Don't worry. It had a bit more to do with
some of the issues.
Yes, I'm about to ask you a question, and then you can answer
just
those.
so the thoughts don't.
Please go straight ahead.
I was just going to talk back on the financing issue, right? The truth is we're dealing with off-grid rural electrification. and I work in financial services, and I can tell you that there is very little appetite, not because of a lack of will, but because of a lack of understanding of what this space is about. So, we're not going to be here and deceive ourselves that suddenly, all these commercial debt is going to go into off-grid in rural areas. Part of one of the projects I'm working on is a venture that's seeking to matchmake entrepreneurs who are providing off-grid solutions with investors. And one thing I tell you that everybody we speak to tells us that they definitely see this as falling within the impact investment domain. Now, the challenge for the economy in Nigeria is how do you develop those types of projects, whether they be rural, semi-urban, that are essentially bankable? And I think it plugs into everything they both said. That one of the biggest things I know from experience and talking to people who are end users is after-sales service. It's just one of the things that will make life extremely simple for Nigerians. Think about how much you spend sorting out your diesel on a monthly basis. You have your fixers, you have people you call, this person supplies you at a certain rate. We need that type of seamless service in terms of generators. And if you think of them as a potential source of funding, the best marketing strategy for the solar sector or the off-grid sector in this country is the users themselves. So if I'm going to go to a bank, and I work for a bank, but I work primarily for an investment bank, so we're structuring projects as opposed to lending. If I go to a bank and say I'm looking for funding for consumer financing for a village or cluster of pools of villages in rural Kogi state, there's just a huge disconnect. And I think we need to appreciate the huge disconnect. There's a lack of experience, and I guess that ties into the sense of empathy. From a demographic point of view, what we need to find is those pools of capital which are long-term and which are patient. So grants and impact investing are fantastic. You definitely don't want to go near the private equity domain or even commercial debt in terms of project finance because scale is an issue. So one of the things that I know about African communities when it comes to the shared use of utilities, whether that's water, light, heating, or fuel, if we can find ways to pool these in forms that you can present to the market as a bankable prospect, I think that will go a long way. The other challenge I really see is that around 40% of communities that actually use off-grid sources of energy still rely heavily on fossil fuel sources of energy. So we're already facing a transition issue in the sense that I know in this market we're not really talking about storage technology where batteries are concerned, but that is something we're increasingly going to use. And one of the potential challenges is that solar is transient. And so for those communities who probably use more than 4 hours a day, we need to think about how we can develop storage systems that are compatible and what that technology and the cost and compatibility of that technology in the Nigerian market. So I think we have to look at what source of funding is relevant for what type of end user. And we need to think about how we can develop those structures for the Nigerian market now.
This is brilliant, and you've actually answered quite a few of my questions. One that's still very much in my mind before I ask you to also respond to some of the issues from Dr. O'Hare is I've heard everyone speak, but no one has mentioned hydro. Considering the fact that Nigeria is right by the coastline,
yeah.
Is there an issue?
Look, we talk often about solar only because
and
it's the most
hydro.
Yeah, hydro it's just a source of energy generated from water, but you have large scale and small scale, and we know. If you look across Africa, one of the projects that historically is sort of floating around the market was the Great Inga project in the DRC and all those communities around the Great Lakes, Rwanda, etc. One of the big issues with hydro, and it's all about sustainability of investment and the impact it has on communities. Large-scale hydro, for instance, has been seen as problematic, but it's essentially financed for large industrial users and has very little connection. What I think we really need to be looking at, we need to find a way to map the needs of communities.
Sure.
So if you think about it, sustainability is about affordability, reliability, and accessibility, right? One of the challenges with grid sources of energy is because you have to think about the distance it takes to transmit from one community to another. So apart from tapping into the sun, which you can't really define as a local source of energy because it's sort of common to the entire countries, what are the other local sources of energy that communities can tap into off-grid?
What are they?
And you know, we're talking about waste to energy, the other types of things like bagasse, other sorts of energy uses that are sustainable.
One of the, sorry everybody on the panel, it's very, very important that we try to explain as much as possible so everyone lives here.
It's a byproduct of sugarcane production. So a lot of countries like Brazil, Nigeria tap into bagasse as a source of energy. So we need to be thinking about local, so whether it's waste to energy. I mean, if you look across most of our huge urban metropolises, you know, we have access to these resources that we can tap. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs who have fantastic, innovative ideas, but the truth is they're not going to go to a bank. A bank will not fund them. So if the government is serious about doing this, then we need to build pools of capital, and we've seen the green bond. I mean, the CBN had an intervention fund for the power sector. I think it was over 300 billion. I think the jury is still out, and I'm sure there are people in this audience who will have a view on that. But part of what they quickly discovered about conventional power is if there are loopholes in different parts of the value chain, you're essentially filling the basket with water. Sure. That is what it's going to be, and that is what we need to avoid. So whilst we can't think of scale off-grid, we need to think about how we are a bit more bespoke with our communities and what could be a reliable and sustainable source of energy that can be replenished over time. And not forget that these same communities, after solar, will still use kerosene lanterns in many cases. So there's a transition element. And the reality of it is Nigeria is primarily a hydrocarbons producing nation. The full transition to renewable energy is not going to happen over the next decade. We'll be lucky if it happens in the next 20 years. And that's not because I want to be a doomsday sayer, but I'm a big advocate of renewable energy, but we can't escape the fact that the entirety of our ecosystem is so traditionally steeped in fossil fuels that it's going to take first movers and people who are willing to take risks to bring change. And there's going to be a need, a large-scale consumer awareness around this opportunity.
Indeed, I mean, there is one argument which a lot of people talk about, and this is very linked to the climate change argument, which is that quite a number of the developed countries, that they burn fossil fuel anyway to get to where they got to. And I think Haju Chan wrote a book around this kind of issues called Taking Away the Ladder, meaning these developed countries use that pathway to be able to create their own energy, and they're now in a position to be able to make the transition more easily. Do you think that Nigeria will be able to make that transition in time that is...
Well, I think Nigeria certainly will be able to. I mean, we've seen it in other sectors, and I guess, you know, how many decades ago people would have thought mobile phones would be absolutely impossible in terms of penetration. Look at where we are today. Those who had huge risk appetite had to sort of make the first move, and then the regulators were sort of catching up with the rest of the sector. But the other thing is, if you look at the OECD economies and the advanced economies, it's also about sustainable use of revenues that come from hydrocarbons. So, you know, the government is talking about diversification away from the oil and gas, but in the short term, we need the oil and gas sector in order to diversify away from it, because the revenues that come from there can be used in more sustainable ways. And maybe that is what we need to start thinking. I mean, you go to a Total filling station, and there's a solar-powered equipment in the Total, in the hydrocarbons filling station. I've also heard about off-grid wind-powered devices for offshore rigs. So I think, I mean, the source of funding could also come from the IOCs, because there is now a huge push.
Let's explain what IOCs are.
Sorry, international oil companies. Like you didn't know that. International oil companies. International oil companies. So I do think that we should start thinking a bit more innovatively around this funding issue.
Excellent. By the way, I'm here for the people, not for the panel. There is one last question before we open up. I'm sure people have questions that are burning. Please write them down. Folks at the back, please, if I don't see you too clearly because these lights are burning me up, but please just wave just so that I can see. But one last question before we move to the panel. Again, busting the myth. So there's this argument, there's this Illuminati, this cartel of generator companies that are devoted and committed themselves to ensuring that none of these things that you guys are talking about will ever work, because the money that they make from selling generators is just too juicy, you know, from the Agreta past my neighbor to the bigger ones. Is this a reality? is there a group, an interest group, lobbying and undermining the possibility of Nigerians being able to get accessible, cheap electrical power supply without having generating sets? Anyone can answer that.
I believe in hard facts.
What are the facts?
Yeah, if there are people, obviously if there are people that are selling generators and, sort of cashing out from our unfortunate, situation, of course they will not be happy if they see that we want to, put things right. But the market is even big enough for them to come in and invest as well. So I think it's a win-win situation. It's just to change strategy and then, investment and start investing in, the new direction of the government. So I don't really, it's possible, but I don't have any facts to back it up that, they are sabotaging or anything.
Jim, no one chasing you at night, slow strings, everything.
Maybe after tonight there will be a few. maybe just one story. This week I was told that we installed a system at somebody's house, one of the rural communities in Kano, and in his cupboard were 2 generators that he was no longer using because the fuel was too expensive. So.
Interesting. Well, any points before I
I certainly don't believe that this cabal or cartel, in Nigeria, we like sensationalism.
I intentionally
But the
avoided
truth
the
is,
word
there are people who have a vested interest. Let's admit, in any type of political economy, there will always be people who have a vested interest. But I think the market is big enough. The market is big enough for everyone. The other thing is, if the government starts to subsidize or give tax incentives and tax breaks and tax holidays to those who import solar panels, solar equipment, even just the business case, there's no reason why you haven't been a generator importer. You can't use the same wherewithal and acumen in that space and transition over to what is a growing and a booming market. And particularly when you look at new developments for real estate, right? I can understand the transition difficulty for existing models, but the truth is, if you're able to solve the issue for Nigerians, absolutely, this market will grow significantly.
Excellent. And on that note, can we first of all just give them a round of applause? It's completely remarkable. I hope you all have to say it's really delightful to see so many people at this time of the evening. Usually, the only time you will see this is if there's a sort of church service, a party or something of that nature. But I think having you all here demonstrates how important this issue is to us as individuals and to us as a country, dealing with our present as well as the future. Before we move to you, and may I just ask how many microphones do we have and where?
EKG.
Thank you, sir. What's your question, sir?
My question is, we've had all kinds of issues about importation of goods to Africa. Nigerians, isn't it time for you guys to wake up? Nobody has thought about producing these solar panels locally, providing local jobs for the youth, providing taxes to the government, and creating jobs and wealth for our people.
Excellent.
When are we going to get it?
Excellent, sir. Very good question. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Harrison, and then I am with Business Day newspaper. I've listened to the presentation of the Executive Director of Rural Electrification Project, and from my observation, the 1 billion naira budget is low from where you start during your presentation. In specifics, could you talk us through maybe some innovative steps you will be taking to attract more pool of funds to expand your projects? Because the 1 billion you talked about is low according to you, and NEC, which is a regulator, there's some of the pool of funds that they should be getting to you. How do you also plan to follow up on such funds to expand your project?
Thank you. Very good question.
First one is on this idea that it might take a long time for SOL to arrive here in an overwhelming sort of way, and raise the question of what happens if the rest of the world moves on. Because if you've been following the headlines the last few weeks in terms of what's happening with transport, what's happening with power generally, Nigeria might not have a choice. And so therefore the question becomes, do you actually want to get ahead of that? And then the second question is a little bit open-ended, but I just want to counter that idea that you can't scale rural power. It's like scaling off-grid, why not?
Sorry, did you say you can't sell?
Scale.
Scale.
Why can't you scale off-grid power? Especially in areas where the grid's already there, but it's dead.
Thank you very much.
Very much. My name is Ulunda Kawanabi from CKJ Energy Partners. First, let me say that I don't know what I'm about to do. I'm not sure whether I want to ask a question or make a comment.
Please just go with the flow. Stream of consciousness.
Maybe I want to think aloud. But just from this conversation, some things started coming to me. The first is what I talked about, the issues of vaccines. In rural communities, you get them, and you're not able to kind of preserve them. And it talked to me because my wife works on, is a public health doctor, and has been trying to help vaccine access to communities. And then Rolaka talked again about impact investment. So here's the question. When you try to extend electricity to rural communities, I'm not talking about rates or where people do use electricity. You're going to be where people have never used electricity, right? So first and foremost, you have to sell them the value of the product, right? If you ever think they're going to pay for it. I'm saying this because I have a wife who goes out trying to get people to take vaccine, accept vaccine, that will keep their children alive, and there's still some resistance, right? So the issue of bankability and the issue of actually getting this product to people who would pay for it, it's a very challenging thing. So how do you then dimension why you're getting electricity there? What is the impact? If you are able to look at it for each community, it could be for agriculture, or it could be for, basically you have health. But I think that it's important to dimension why electricity has to get there, and explain it to the community, and then begin to actually sell this service and find way for that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, moderator and panelists. My name is Gabriel Iosase. I'm a legal consultant and regulation specialist. I have a comment and a question, and this is directed to the Executive Director, REA. Even before you started, I had already made up my mind about the question I was going to ask. I didn't know you were going to touch on it. My question was going to be, how has REA worked with NEC? You tried to give an explanation, but it was like you were giving the problems that you have. Now, I want to say that the success of REA, to a very large extent, depends on how REA synergizes with NEC. Because much of the funding, like you say, to REA must come from NEC, either in form of surplus, the fines, and the other contributions that NEC may impose on eligible customers and licensees.
Yes, sir.
Now, REA was a creation of the reform agenda. In other words, it's been there maybe 10 years.
Which country, sir?
Yeah. You've told us about what you have been doing in the last 4 months or 5 since you've been inaugurated. What has REA been doing in the past 10 years or so? And when do we expect to see the benefits?
And the results. Excellent. Thank you so much.
My name is Duna Okena from Cambridge, Boston. And my question would go to my very good friend, Dr. Sanusi. I would like to see his face. Okay, so Sanusi, basically you've talked about your challenge, you've talked about optionalization of the Rural Electrification Fund. My question now is, on a practical note, we are Nigerians, we know the issues, me and you know the issues. What support, what kind of help do you need to make sure that the Rural Electrification Fund is activated? Considering NEC and the possible excuses you may get from the other sources. So I'm asking you, what kind of support do you need? Both from organizations and the rest. Then to Mrs. Rola, I've been looking for you for a long while.
Now you found that.
Yes, thank you. So my question now is, you talked about long-term sources of funding which we need. Now my question is, how do we channel long-term funds like pension funds, mortgage funds, green bond, I don't know where that one is. Or how do we channel those kind of fundings into this kind of green renewable energy project? And is it possible for us to compel or beg or force banks to start having in their portfolio, this kind of development projects? I don't know how it wants to come, but that's basically my question. How do we channel long-term?
Very good question, so that as many people here have an opportunity to participate. I think the question from EK from Silicon Valley about how is this really helping to create jobs locally, and create a local market for solar panels that are developed in the country. What options and opportunities do we see on the ground?
So, is that
yes, we can hear.
Yeah, so at some point in the future, there'll be a big demand for solar panels in Nigeria, right? There'll be the utility scale projects being built, there'll be the solar home systems. So as a businessman, we want to keep our costs low. So, obviously, I think there will come a point whereby, it makes complete sense for us to start buying solar panels in Nigeria.
Sorry, let me ask you, is it possible to produce them locally?
I think so.
Have you explored that option?
We haven't explored that option at this stage.
Is it something that is feasible?
That can be produced here? Yeah, I think, why not?
Okay.
Yeah. In terms of the Mass People's business, so it does rely, we open on it's a shop cluster model which needs shop manager, it needs technicians, it needs sales agents, that's all local. Sales force which need to be trained.
And you're already doing that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
As part of your development process. Excellent. So, anybody chiming in on that?
I was going to say something.
Very briefly.
Sorry. I think we need to be specific because he specifically asked about solar panels. And if you think about off-grid technology, renewable, there's a whole range of things. They're component parts. Anything can be produced in Nigeria, in my opinion. The question is, can it be produced competitively, right? And I'm a firm believer that you focus where you have a competitive advantage. Now, you can build that competitive advantage over time, but if it's not the most cost-effective way to develop this industry now, what you need to do is continue to offer the tax breaks. This may be controversial to those who import, give them all the support you need, but also developing simultaneously knowledge and capacity building to transition to local manufacture.
Okay.
And you may not be able to manufacture the panels themselves, but what about the bolts and nuts? So we could also look at other aspects of the value chain. That's
very helpful. Thank you, Doc.
Yeah, I was just going to add that government's policy now is to move towards encouraging local content, and recently the ease of doing business, executive order was passed, and part of it, especially for us in the agencies, is to consider companies that have high local content value first before any other company. So this is a good policy to encourage people to come in and manufacture. And we've received a lot of people coming in telling us they want to go into manufacturing panels, and not just panels, because batteries are also very important. I think they form the bulk of the expenses for mini grids, for instance. So we are encouraging them to come in and invest. This is the time, the policy is there, and then the market is there. So I think this is the best time for them to come in.
Well, very helpful, but our friend Ede from Business Day says that your 1 billion is too little. Is it too little?
Of course it is.
What do you need?
Okay, let me just give you a sense of what we need. For me, we did a preliminary study, and by the way, I didn't mention that data and planning was also very important, and government had a role to play in that. So we did a preliminary study with the help of GIZ, and then we discovered that about 7,000 communities are potentially viable for mini-grids deployment. And then we said, okay, let's just do a quick analysis. 7,000, if we wanted to take 700 every year and deploy mini-grids to these communities for the next 10 years, how much is that going to come up to? And then how much grant would we need to give and all of that? and we're looking at yearly 29 billion, to deploy just 700 per year.
Sorry, can you repeat that figure again? So we all just
29 billion. It's just a rough estimate. 29 billion naira, to deploy to 700 communities for the next 10 years. Because we have preliminary study that says we have at least potentially viable 7,000 mini-grid clusters. So if you're giving us, 1 billion, that's just like a drop in the ocean. So we are not. And someone also mentioned what are the other sources we're looking at. I think that was still Samson, yeah? Yeah, and then what other sources? Like I mentioned, we're discussing with everybody really. And now we have Rolake here, she should also come in and try to help us structure and pull resources together. We're looking for people like you, and we've been basically talking. We know the people, and we know what they can do. We've been discussing with people within the sector. A lot of people, testify to that, and we're trying to bring in, other people, the World Bank, International Development Agency, all of them are doing.
Fantastic. Please note that Rolake, since and this is actually quite a team, isn't it? You have the government regulator, you have the financier, and you have the entrepreneur. This is a dream team for making power work in Nigeria, isn't it? But Rolake, since you're in the finance aspect and you talked a lot more, and maybe I'll use that to connect with the question, I think it was Donald that asked about, how do you compel banks to really invest? You had already touched on it earlier on, and how do you help him find 29 billion?
Okay, so I guess two things. There are all sorts of avenues which are available. We can look at the companies that are even developing the projects and what their own needs are as corporates. They're increasing avenues to raise finance, whether it's debt capital markets, do commercial papers. The biggest thing for any financer is how will I get repaid? Really, I think it's a simple basic principle. So how can we get repaid? So if the purchasing power of the end users is not adequate, or if there are issues with collecting the payments, then that is where we start to see we need government or we need other types of interventions. And I think most banks would be willing to have a conversation. There are also credit lines which other international finance institutions and local finance institutions are giving to commercial banks. But also, I think if you look at banks' teams that finance energy, Nigeria has been developed around the oil and gas sector. So from a knowledge perspective, those who actually understand solar financing, renewable energy financing, and not just utility scale funding, because I think there are a lot of people who understand how to fund grid tie-back systems or grid-based systems. But we need to start training and developing of that pool. And actually, if it means the government has to go to banks and say, we'll allocate these funds, but they have to be used, there's no point in allocating the funds if you don't have the capacity. So we need to look at that. And I think for a lot of off-grid projects, we need to start tapping into pools of equity financing locally. I think the PFAs are one thing, but again, most pension fund administrators globally, it's all about balancing risk appetite and the risk portfolio. So it goes back to the issue of de-risking the system. The other thing we need to start looking at is strategic partnerships, which can also bring finance, those who've developed these projects in other parts of the world, who may be looking at Nigeria as an entry point of view, and that could actually help build local content as well.
Jim, thank you very much, Rolake. Jim, Chris asked a really interesting question. From your experience, from what you've seen on the ground, can Nigeria get ahead of what is happening in terms of the global diversification of energy sources? Chris, I'm paraphrasing your question, but does Nigeria have that opportunity to get ahead, or is it that we have to sort of scale up incrementally over a period of time?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I can answer. But I think Nigeria is very unique in terms of its power deficit for such a large population. So there must be that opportunity to get ahead. Whether or not it can, I don't know what's happening elsewhere. But he brings up a very good point. There was a couple of months ago. There was I can't remember his name. There's a German professor here which was talking about solar renewable energy, and this is kind of outside of my area, but you then could face stranded assets, right, where the renewable technologies have kind of taken off and have left behind. So, and that's a problem that even a country like Germany is is trying to deal with, where they've got, they've got their electrical distribution system based around centralised power stations, but now they've got 20,000 farmers which have sort of panels which are now feeding back into the grid. So that's an issue that even developing countries are now having to deal with.
Yes, well, okay, you can, but I do want to just join another question. Maybe you can respond to some of the questions around social impacts as well.
Just on the issue that Chris raised, very, very good, poignant question. I think one of the things we also have to forget that I personally feel that gas provides a very useful reference point in terms of transitioning to renewable energy. My own concern is, because people talk about CNG and LNG for transportation, my own concern is how we start the process of adaptation in this market, right? And I don't have the answers, to be honest with you, but if we have any lessons to learn, look at what has happened to our potential export markets for hydrocarbons. They basically dried up over the years. So it's obviously a critical issue. I think it's possible, but I think we also have to figure out how we make use of what we do already have in a more sustainable manner. So, I mean, it's not a black and white question. And I think comparing the Nigerian market to, say, Germany at one point last year, I think they said 75% of energy use in one day came from solar energy. Now they seem light years ahead of us. But closer to home, Rwanda, South Africa, Morocco, it's possible, and they're doing it across those markets. So I don't think it's totally inconceivable. The issue around impact. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe this could also be something for government to consider. A lot of the problems we want to solve socially, we could actually find 50% of the answer with the power sector. And I don't think we often make the linkage.
So wait, so that you mean security, health,
is it security?
education?
I was talking to someone today about storage for agricultural produce who was looking at a solar power solution. So I think there's also a need for the policymakers in different sectors to be talking, because the solution for one sector may actually lie in the other sector. And I don't think we should be looking at these issues in isolation. So when it comes to vaccines, I mean, if you just speak to the layman, they may not immediately think that there might be a connection here in terms of storage and preservation. So I do agree with you, and I think there's a place for impact funding specifically to do that, and philanthropists to look into that market as well.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll end this round of questions with you, Dr. Ohiari. One, Donald wanted to find out what help do you need, but more importantly, well, maybe not more importantly, but quite importantly, Gabriel is asking, what have you been doing for the past 10 years?
Okay, let me answer Gabriel first.
I would understand why you want.
Okay, so Ari, like you rightly mentioned, has been there since 2006. They've been doing quite a lot, but more on the grid extension side. And but even on that, they've done quite a lot. It's just they haven't been able to really show the world that they've been able to connect a lot of communities via grid extension. And just I think last year, I mean, we were advocating from the outside then that they should move towards mini grids in solar systems, and they deployed a couple of mini grids last year. And now that we're here, we want to carry on with that. So for grid extension, putting transformers in place and all of those things, they did quite a number of those over the years. And to be honest, they did a lot. It's just people did not hear about it. But we are saying that's not the right way to go. We are just extending lines that are now for private companies, wasting government funds. I don't think we should continue doing that. We should look for efficient ways of using government's scarce resources. So that's why we're now moving towards this grant, equity financing, and bringing the private sector. And for Donald, Henry Ball Foundation, which you work with, has been very supportive. We need, because the REF, trying to operationalize the Rural Electrification Fund, is a new sort of thing. So we need a lot of capacity, and I want to use this opportunity to even thank you guys. You provided an expert to help to work with us to operationalize it. But beyond that, we need money. That's what REF is for. We need a lot of money. We need to see how we can put heads together, to get the right kinds of funds, into REF so that we can deploy it. It doesn't need to also come into REF if it's something that is there and they want to deploy it and they are not sure if they bring it into REF if it will, go the way they want. We don't mind, but just work with us the end goal is for us to put projects on the ground, supply electricity and increase access to the rural communities.
I can answer one aspect of Chris's question around scalability in rural areas. I wasn't saying that off-grid electricity rural areas is not scalable. I think I did refer to aggregation and the fact that for certain types of, say, project financing, there's usually a minimum deployment size, right? And I think if you can replicate and demonstrate success, which can be scalable, it is possible to do it. And we've seen it in places like Rwanda and Kenya, so I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you for closing the loop on that. Donald, if I may add, I also in the previous inclination had the opportunity to study the German energy vending supported by the Henry Boll Foundation. And the idea then was to find people who worked for government, who could be created as champions to actually push that agenda in policy. And there were quite a number of us in strategic positions that as a result of that, actually started looking at any policy on our desk and said, look, how green is this policy? One thing we would encourage you to do, I look behind us here, we don't say Henry Boll Foundation funding this, so we definitely hope that in the next session, we'll see Henry Boll Foundation written here funding this fantastic event. I'm sure you'll take that message back to President King. Right, ladies and gentlemen, let's take another round of questions. I will start this time on the left, then to the right, then to the front, then to the back.
My name is Abdisalam Yusuf.
Very, very quick.
I work with NERC. I work with them. First, I want to clarify some issues with regards to the funding that should come from RE to REA. We need to understand that the Act requires some funds to put REA, but there are some CPs, there are some maturity conditions that are required. For example, the money that will come from illegal customers comes only when the illegal customers are declared and they exist. Currently, they don't exist. You have minister declared immunity, but it's yet to be in force. Number two, the fund that's come from audited account of NEP has put some CPs. One of it is that, first of all, there had to be surplus, which we have not had of recent. We had before, but when we had, that time REA does not exist. We then need to have the right to the National Assembly to approve.
Can I ask you to move your mic closer?
Okay, we need the right to the Assembly to approve the transfer of funds from our surplus to the REA. At the time, we took the time to get the lower house to approve, and later the senior house has not approved at that time. So I'm not aware if that has not been approved. Then at the time, before they came in, the REF is supposed to be different from REA accounts. REF is separated to operate power sector in not of the office of REA or personnel services. So we require that REA provide us at that time the account of REA so that those through our fines should pay the money directly to those accounts. But it did not have one. So they although we could ask them to pay for it. So the money that were fined to those are still intact. If they provide the REF account and the CPs are met, those money will move to it. Once the Assembly approve the various level of CPC required, the money for surplus are moved to it. But I mean, last year there was no surplus because we really had short of funds because of we actually are getting funding from the market. When the market perform poorly, we also get poor funding for our side. So we don't have surplus. So we need to know when those things exist and you get them. So we're not holding you money.
Finally, my name is Mohammed Ram, and I think I will talk to the three persons on the panel because energy solution anywhere in the world stands on a tripod of policy solutions, financing solutions, and technology. We've seen evolution in technology to where renewable energy has become somewhat cheap, right? Sanusi has talked about policy, even though we don't know the level of innovation in those policies. However, my doubt is with Olake, and my question goes to you. What level of financing innovation have you brought into solving the energy problem in Nigeria?
Because you mean her, you mean her as an individual?
Okay, FBN merchant or as a bank. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. To the point.
Good evening. My name is Hassan Abelo Aliyu, and I work for Nigeria Solar Capital Partners. My question is for Sanusi. Oftentimes in Nigeria, it feels as though when there's a problem, you get so many independent players throwing their money at this problem. And for the amount of money that is thrown at the problem, you're not getting the sustainable impact you expect. Does REA have a policy for gathering all the independent players in this off-grid market, telling them to bring their ideas, bring their investment, so you can plan it in a way that the investment has more impact than when everybody is just independently throwing money at a problem and trying to solve it independently? Thank you.
You will forgive me, everybody. I am trying to be as fair as possible. Please.
I am Dr. Mohamed Sulu, Director, Center for Research and Innovation, Federal Project Nassau. My question is that
sorry, I missed your first name. Forgive me.
Okay, Dr. Mohamed Sulu. Okay. Then my question goes to Dr. Sanusi. And the issue here is that it is not a doubt that we are presently in an energy crisis in Nigeria, because you can't explain to anybody. I'm an electrical engineer by profession. I did my PhD in renewable energy. Then, like for example, in Nigeria here, the population is said to be 170 million. But in Malaysia, there the population is around 26 million. And there they generate up to 38,000 megawatts. But here we have just maybe 5,000 megawatts or thereabout. The issue now is this. When we talk about off-grid, the target point are the rural dwellers. Then the issue is that they are economically challenged. Then there should be subsidy, because we need aggressive support to develop our renewable energy sector here. Then this subsidy, who is going to pay for it? Because Dr. Sanusi said something that the investors or the stakeholders are already asking for some things that are not possible. But the issue is this: there should be support for them to invest in the renewable energy sector, so that the rural areas can really get themselves economically.
Thank you very much.
Here is the name of Africa Clean Energy Summit. Why I'm commending you is to look at the strategic option of the beauty of this program can be translated to the policy makers. Because I was speaking on Good Morning Nigeria on the 4th of this month. I said Nigeria has no business in energy poverty. Rolake has mentioned the case of the IOC. I was in Delta for 10 years. The gas that is being flared can power the whole of West Africa. I was told by one of the oil companies. This particular oil company succeeded in India in the solar loan program. So when I look at this aspect, and I said that there is a need to borrow a leaf to how strategically we can translate what we are putting together here.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. Implementable.
Understood.
And on that last note, I want to mention one point.
Very, very quickly, sir.
Very quickly. The aspect of what we call the biogas. We find out that 47% of waste in Abuja is biodegradable for a biogas that can generate 7 megawatts of electricity. We are working on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was here last time.
Your name, please.
My name is Prince Albert Kumar.
Prince.
I'm from Prince Albert Company Limited. And last time when I came here was for biogas. There's been a lot of negativity here. And
today or the other one?
Well, that one, and a bit of this today. Because for like a place, don't take offense. It's not all doom and dead. Because there are a lot of organizations in Nigeria that have been doing certain things that are trying to push this ahead. One, Bank of Industry, GIC, REA, they've been doing a lot. We might not see it. So when we are condemning everything, or we're looking bad on everything, we should also look, maybe we don't know what is underground. Things are being done. For Jim, you brought some solar generators. I want to know what were the capacities. And for Dr. Sanusi, you came here last time and you said that REF will start this month, somewhere this month. Or you put into practice the first call this month.
Before the end of the year, that's what.
Okay. Now, what have you done to sell the idea that solar is coming to these communities, to rural communities? Because, you see, all the three panelists have mentioned this, that without marketing this thing, it will not go anywhere because people will resist it. What has REA done to be able to market the renewable energy that will be going into these communities? Thank you very much.
Okay, so we need really very short, sharp responses. I'm not even going to mention people's names. I'll go, if you miss anything, I'll bring it up. I'll start on the left with Rolake, move to the right. If you get any other questions, please answer, because I want to give people one last chance to ask a few questions and then you have closing remarks. Please be very quick.
The first one I wanted to address was Prince. Thank you very much for your question. But I'm a big advocate of renewable energy, and I don't think I've been negative, with all due respect. I think, for me, I recognize the low-hanging fruit, and I'm wondering why there are obstacles. So I want to challenge the stakeholders. I'm a stakeholder as well in this. And my own concern is to find the best way to bring financing to those who need it. So I know about a lot of the good things that are going on, and I'd like to be better informed if there are some aspects I'm not appreciating. There was a question around the level of financing and innovation. One of the biggest things I think we need to look at and push more, and it's not necessarily innovative, is credit enhancement. It's something that we see across all structures. And it goes back to this issue of how do you make those projects bankable? Who are the people who have a huge risk appetite, understand the space, and are willing to either provide guarantees, underwrite, or provide cheap sources of financing either to the consumers or the developers. And I'd be happy to have a conversation with you because that's one of the things. My platform is called Today, which means Light Has Come, and it's looking to match off-grid entrepreneurs with potential sources of financing. Final thing is subsidies for. I'm not a big fan of subsidizing energy consumption. However, I think there are exceptions that can be made when it comes to renewable energy. But rather than subsidies, I think it should be really about how you make it cheaper for developers to develop projects and how you also give consumers access to financing through commercial banks.
First, very easy question is the capacity of the system is 50 watts. Second question, or second comment, or even first comment, was about doom. Was it doom or not?
It's negative. All doom and doom.
Yeah, well, we're here trying to invest in Nigeria. I think I hope that's a positive story. I've tried to be positive. Maybe I'm a bit, down British kind of.
No, I think what he's trying to say is that in complementing what everybody else there is doing, that there are other initiatives that are ongoing and perhaps we need other people to hear about them. So I'm sure there can be a conversation around how do you sensitize and share more information about local initiatives. Thank you, sir. Jim, any other one?
Yeah, so obviously we believe in Nigeria, that's why we're here. We think there's good potential there. On the terms of innovative financing, I think in terms of the product that we're bringing to the market, I think we're the only ones that offer that seamless service whereby not only do we provide the product, but we also install it and we also do the O&M. So I think that's quite innovative in our space.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sanusi,
thank you very much.
Just address all the other questions first and then the nerd one last.
Okay. All right.
And we have like a minute for that.
Okay, so Hassan mentioned a policy of bringing people together. And that's what I mentioned in my opening remark, that's what we are planning to do. That's what we are currently doing. It wasn't there before, but we are now acting as that central coordinating point where we're bringing everybody together to discuss issues to move the sector forward. And we're currently planning a workshop for November to bring all stakeholders together. And we'll certainly invite you. Dr. Zubairu said we should give some subsidies. We are not going to be giving consumer subsidies. We are giving more of, the grant that we're giving is more for capital subsidies. And like Rolake mentioned, it's important to see how you can reduce the development costs for developers, to put these projects on the ground so that it can reflect on the tariff as well. We don't have too high tariff and the rural people are not able to afford it. So yes, subsidies, but capital subsidies.
Excellent.
Which other one? Prince Umori, when is REF starting? I mentioned that it's going to start before the end of the year. We have operational guidelines that have been approved by the board of REA. It's currently before the minister. And I think they're reviewing it just to be sure it's in line with the policy, and then we'll get approval. As soon as we get the approval, we'll start the process for the call. And NERC, please, I need to address NERC. So the fines are supposed to come from not just eligible customers, but licensees and eligible customers. The licensees have been there. You know, let's say, okay, eligible customers were just declared recently, but the licenses have been there. We've been hearing in the news that you've been collecting fines, you find a new disco, you find this disco, you find that disco. Where is the money? Why is it not in ref? I'm going to talk about REF, we're a government agency, there's a TSA, and then all our accounts are with CBN. We have a separate account for ref, it's with CBN. If you've asked for it recently, we would have sent it to you. We had a meeting with you guys, but the vibe we're getting is like you guys are not even taking rural education seriously. You don't think it's something that is worth being committed to, and that's the vibe we get, and it's quite frustrating because we have 95 million people that don't have access to electricity, and all the focus is just on the grid side of things.
Right. So,
no, I'm not. For the surplus.
That's why I said this should be last one.
For the surplus, the issue of surpluses. You said, oh, you've not had surpluses for the past 3 years. Yes, we had the big liquidity issues since maybe 2014 or 2015, but you've been existing since 2006. So what happened between 2006 and 2013? Sir, is the money there?
Please go right ahead.
The approval is there. I mean, we have meetings with the National Assembly all the time. They don't have a problem giving us approval, and they've even given approval. But they ask them if the money is still there. What have they done with the surpluses they've collected since?
Fantastic. Okay, so clearly there is a need for a bear summit, Obama-like bear summit for all the critical stakeholders to come together. We have 5 minutes, and I can only take 2 questions.
I'm the co-founder of iRecycle.com, an online platform where people can cash on their recyclables. We are all SDG advocates, but I think one of the issues we have in our country is the problem of sensitization. And I want to know what our panelists on their different platforms are doing about that, because people need to know.
Okay.
If people don't know,
they can
say.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Henry Abba by name, and I just want to appreciate this meeting. It's a good one.
Sir, your question, sir.
I want to actually ask this question because the whole thing is all about funding. I'm looking at what plan do you have for investors? Supposing, because this money we're talking about here can be raised in 24 hours if there are benefits that this person seated here can actually get from this generation. Because you charge for this operation of these services. If there's a room or there's a platform or there's something that we can actually come in and say, okay, with our token, we are investing in this. Is there anything like that? I want to know.
Okay, let me start with you.
Okay, so thank you very much. We all have a role to play. We are in government today, we're all Nigerians. We want to see the sector move forward. In your only 2 ways, see how you can contribute to moving the sector forward. First one is sensitization. We have a promotion unit and we have cooperatives, cooperative societies that we form. We have quite a number of them. We use them to sensitize the local people because most of them don't even have electricity, so we can't do it through electronic media or media. So we try to target the rural communities through their cooperatives. We have thousands of them across the country, so that's how we try to sensitize them. And then for the plans for investors and profit motive, I mean, this is a business. People are already in it. You're making money from it. If you want, you can come. We link you up with people that are already making money from it. You study the business model and see if it's something that is worth your while. But a lot of people also do crowdfunding, for this. Investors, pull money together and then deploy projects. When I was in GIZ, one of their projects was funded that way, by pulling resources, together. People all over the world, all you need to do is just show them the financial model, show them the market, the business potentials and all. And if they're interested, all over the world, people are putting money together, to fund it. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your closing remarks. Jim.
On the sensitization issue, we send sales agents out to the rural areas around our shop, to the markets, and they talk to the communities about solar. They show them the products and how they work, and it's quite an intensive exercise in educating the communities about solar, about the product in particular, how they can subscribe to the service. We're also talking with the Lighting Africa program, which does a lot of good work on that front. What was the, sorry, what was the second?
It's okay, go ahead.
Oh, in terms of investment, yeah, I mean, we're talking to, there is an investment opportunity with us. We're talking to lots of different investment groups at the moment. Someone mentioned crowdfunding with, you know, we've looked at that. There are many opportunities for this sort of business.
Thank you very much. 1 minute, Rolake. Closing remarks.
I guess second everything my colleagues have said on the panel, and also that this is something that is going to happen sooner or later, and I think we all could do very well to get ahead of the game. I think there needs to be a national sensitization program, something very strategic and targeted for renewable energy, and we haven't seen that because I think we still have certain vested interests, perhaps, that have not quite.
So you're with the cartels?
I didn't say cartels, vested interests, but you know, I think the only way is forward, really, because the world is changing and we need to move fast.
Thank you very much, Rolake, and we're doing very well for time. We have just 1 minute, and I will use probably half of that to just say, well, first of all, I'd really like to thank our panelists and all of you for your questions. We apologize if everybody was not able to share their thoughts, but please, you know, after this is a conversation that will be ongoing. I'm sure at some point in time we will be thinking about forms of energy that we don't even know exist. So please, even after this, please mingle, exchange business cards, and let's keep this conversation going. I think if there's anything that is very clear to all of us today, is that no sector can do it alone. Government can't do it alone, the private sector can't do it alone, the entrepreneurs can't do it alone, and even the business, the financiers can't do it alone. This is a challenge that needs not just all hands on deck, it also needs all minds on deck. So key things that jump out are issues around finance, information, skills capacity, but also synergy. The need for synergy across all the different stakeholder groups. The reality, ladies and gentlemen, is that it is not impossible. We can do it, and I think that if we put the people first, the needs of the people first, definitely we can address this stranglehold that is really sucking the lifeblood out of our potential as a nation, stopping us from becoming the true giant of Africa, as many like to call us. And if we're all able to pull ourselves together, working with people like our panelists and yourselves, it is very possible to light up Nigeria. On that note, I'd like to thank the organizers and yourselves for giving me the opportunity to moderate this discussion. Have a good evening.
I want to thank you all for being at this event, for spending 2 hours with us. It has been really tangible. Thank you for your valuable contributions. Thank you for your insightful questions. Thank you so much, because we know that as you leave this place, what you have gotten from this place is not just going to end here. You're going to implement and form strategic collaborations that will bring rural electrification to 100% in Nigeria. And before we go forward, I'd like to apologize on behalf of Segun Adaju. He could not be here today because he was summoned by the minister yesterday for a meeting in Jos. So Nextier apologizes on his behalf. Then next, I would like to thank our panelists especially. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Rolake. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Dr. Ohiari. You have made this event what it has been today. Really insightful, really interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you also to our moderator. You have given us an excellent event. Also want to say thank you to Top Pyramid Art Center. You have always been a part of the team, and for that we are grateful. And another group of people who must not leave out today is MacArthur Foundation. They are Nextier Power's biggest supporters, they are our biggest clients, and they are in the house today. I want to say thank you to them. Thank you. Please look out for the Nigeria Electricity Hub. We will keep sending you newsletters, we will keep sending you weekly reviews and updates from the Nextier team. And apart from that, we have our next event, the Power Dialogue, coming up on the 18th of October, and we'll give you more details concerning the event. That's the theme, and then where and when we're going to meet for that. Thank you so much. And then before we go, please let's not forget to fill these out, because if we don't fill them, we might not really be able to measure the impact of this dialogue, and we really need it soon. We can go forward and we can implement what it is that we have discussed here. So please do not forget to fill this
and return this. And after this, we can go on, we can meet other people, we can network, we have more food and more drinks. And one thing that we must leave here today with is, it's one thing to walk the walk, it's another thing to walk the talk.